much of the corruption and state capture that happened in South Africa is known because of whistleblowers. They are the brave men and women who courageously exposed the looting of private and government entities. In her latest book offering, award-winning journalist Mandy Wiener documents their stories and shines a bit of a spotlight on what happens to whistleblowers once their time in the spotlight has ended. Without giving too much away, and I hope I won't be able to do that, let's dive straight into it. Mandy Wiener joining us now in studio. Mandy, great to have you in, fellow colleague in the industry, and now yet an author of another book, I must admit, right? When I first sat down and I was getting into the document itself, I was really hoping for feel-good stories that are going to make me feel really proud about some of the whistleblowers in our country. And I'll admit, by the end of my time with the book, I was left in want. And perhaps that's the point, right? Many of us have a bit of a warped perception of what it takes to be a whistleblower.
Well, that's right, and that's exactly the reason, Ayanda, that I decided to write this book, was because I think that there are misconceptions. But one of my biggest fears also was that people like you would get to the end of the book and would feel bereft, that they would be deterred from blowing the whistle, and that's not what I want to achieve. I want to encourage whistleblowers to come forward because they are invaluable. We need them to come forward if we're going to expose corruption and do anything about it. But I also want to advocate for some kind of change legislatively, the framework, the societal shift, the stigma. A lot needs to change if we're going to stack the cards in the favor of whistleblowers, because if people are going to speak truth to power and power prevails every time, they're not going to come forward.
Absolutely, and we'll speak to some of those calls in just a moment. But let's first address the backdrop under which all of this happened, right? You were spoiled for choice when it comes to which whistleblowers to speak to. What informed who you eventually decided to profile?
So this is by no means an exhaustive list of whistleblowers. These are not the best whistleblowers. They're not the most high profile. I tried to look at a cross-section of whistleblowers in state-owned entities, in the private sector, in various industries, and also people who've had good experiences, who've leveraged their whistleblowing and made it a career even, to those who've had really negative experiences so that that reality could be portrayed. So I also looked at whistleblowers that I thought were interesting. Something about their story hooked me. I felt it compelling, and that's why I decided to tell it. There are so many other whistleblowers that could have been included, that feel that they should have been included, and many people will think that some of these people should not have been included. But I felt that they were whistleblowers and their story should be told.
One of the many interesting aspects of this conversation you bring up was you were also trying to ascertain what goes into the making of a whistleblower, right? Is it nature? Is it nurture? Is it a combination of the two? By the end of this process, do you feel like you ever got to the bottom of that?
No, I still don't know. And it's something that really fascinates me, is when there are many people who hold the same information, what leads some people to just look the other way and ignore what's going on and land up being complicit through their inaction and their silence? And then what makes those individuals speak up? What makes those individuals feel, well, I cannot live with this, it cannot go on, I can't look the other way, I have to say something? And it's various things that I look at. It could be nurture, it could be faith, it could be some kind of civic duty. There's various ingredients that go into it. I still don't know definitively what that is, and I think for everyone it's something different. Some people are accidental whistleblowers, some people feel compelled that they are deeply principled to speak out, and some people do it out of self-preservation as well.
Yeah. You speak about silence and being complicit. Suzanne Daniels comes to mind. She's a whistleblower, blew the lid at Eskom. The well-rehearsed argument around her story is that she actually kept quiet for way too long, and that, in some respect, made her complicit in some of the dodgy dealing that was taking place at Eskom. Given the cost, given the complexity of her story, do you think that framing is fair?
Look, I go into that in quite a bit of detail in the book as well, and I sit down with Suzanne and her story, and I've also spoken to her subsequent to her testimony. And her point is that she feels that Zondo doesn't know how to actually deal with whistleblowers. And there's been a lot of criticism of her because people feel that she was complicit, and she acknowledges that she made mistakes during her tenure at Eskom. But the point that I also try and make in the book is that she remains a whistleblower, even if people think that she was complicit, because she still has exposed a great deal of what happened at Eskom, and that needs to be valued, that needs to be appreciated. She still chose to come out and expose this and blow the whistle on it. And she believes that she was not complicit, but that she made mistakes, but other people absolutely feel differently. And I really do interrogate that with her and ask her if she's complicit and whether or not she should be considered a whistleblower. In my view, she is a whistleblower because she did speak out, but I do appreciate the criticism of that, of people saying, no, she waited too long, she looked the other way. But what you also have to understand is that sometimes the environment is just not conducive to speaking out, and that's something that many of these whistleblowers struggled with. When boards are captured, when the police is captured, who do you go to?
Absolutely. And again, that will feed into what ought to happen moving forward. But you also did mention that, Suzanne Daniels is pretty prominent. I mean, she's been at the State Capture Commission of Inquiry more than once, and I remember the headlines were really just so jarring at the time when she started speaking out. There are other whistleblowers, though, that don't enjoy as much prominence, right? One of them is Mos Phakwe, right?
Correct.
He paid the ultimate price, so to speak, after trying to unveil some of the dodgy dealing in the Northwest. But you tell that story through the experiences of his son and a close associate, right? And that sort of raised questions for me about whether or not we're placing those who are caught in the crossfire correctly in this grand narrative of what it means to be a whistleblower. Your thoughts on that?
So for me, in the two stories that involved murder in particular, the one is Mos Phakwe, who was a councillor in Rustenburg. The other one is Jimmy Mohlala, who was the speaker in Nelspruit in Mpumalanga. And, those stories, they were murdered for speaking out, and there have not been convictions in either of those cases. And in both of those instances, I spoke to the sons. And their stories are so poignant and so moving. The way that they feel that their fathers have left them this legacy of truth, and that they carry the burden of this legacy and how they live with it. And not enough attention is given to these stories. You literally have somebody who is murdered for speaking truth to power and for trying to end the rot of corruption. And they land up dead, and yet we don't remember them. Their families are left devastated. They, in many instances, can't find employment. They haven't got financial income. And it's extremely concerning, the way that we treat whistleblowers in this country. And as you say, I think that often the spotlight is on those who are in the crossfire or are in some way complicit, whereas those who are more virtuous or who have got more principle or integrity aren't given the kind of appreciation and aren't lauded the way that they should be.
Sure. Interesting stuff. In some of the chapters, you also mentioned how, I think you were reflecting on the disposition that Suzanne Daniels was in when you did speak to her. And you went on to mention that like many other whistleblowers, she appears to have been broken. Can you imagine a situation where someone in a country like ours speaks out and they're not left broken?
I do hope so. I do hope to advocate for some kind of change where there is a better framework, a better structure, a better legislation. I can tell you now that many of the whistleblowers featured in this book are hollowed out. They're broken. They've really been left devastated. They suffer from PTSD. Their marriages have fallen apart. It really is difficult. It is bleak. But having said that, I want people to understand the reality, but we also need whistleblowers to come forward. So we have to change that environment. We have to stack the cards in their favor if we do want them to come forward. Corruption Watch says 2,000 whistleblowers came forward in the first 6 months of this year to expose corruption. We need that to happen, but we need to change the framework, change the culture, change the environment if we're going to expect people to come forward, and there has to be consequences for corruption.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm being told I'm out of time, but very quickly, in your mind, what does the immediate change look like, materially at least?
I think it's culture, it's a stigma, and I think that's where you and I and everybody else watching can change the way that they perceive whistleblowers, that they're not troublemakers or pariahs or impimpies, but rather they are doing a civic duty and they are holding power to account.
Multi-award-winning journalist Mandy Wiener with The Whistleblowers. It's out, right?
It's out
you can
today.
Definitely get yourself a copy. Time well spent on my part. Mandy, thanks very much for coming to the
Thanks for having me, Anne.
Right, Mandy Wiener is a multi-award-winning journalist and, of course, an author.